For this video, I wanted to take a look at how we're using Blackmagic RAW on our fashion campaign shoots. Prior to this, we were using ProRes at 2K on the Ursas, and that was the 4444 setting, so even above the standard, you know, what everyone sets it to as 422HQ. And that was great, and it gave us a lot of information and detail. It was already a pretty heavy codec data-wise at that point, so when we had the opportunity to shoot Blackmagic RAW, we found that actually we weren't really noticing that we were using that much more card space than we were previously on these campaigns. On top of that, we also now get the full sensor resolution of 4.6K, which is a bonus because that means we're getting more detail and we're not taking that detail and compressing it down to 2K at the camera side. Because we work in RAW, we can change the color temperature after the fact, along with a whole host of other settings. Now behind all of that is the fact that these shoots are actually incredibly time sensitive. It's usually just a first AC, that would be Rathika, and myself operating a Ronin 2 with the ready rig. And that means that we don't have a lot of ability to manipulate things on location. So we can't bring in lots of frames, can't bring in lights, can't bring in lots of neg. We do have a little Lastalite halo with us sometimes just to pick something up, but it's rare that we get an opportunity to use that. Plus, the weather is crazy in Ireland. Looking beautiful 5 minutes ago. Try to get a shot. In comes the weather. We now have more water outside the lake than inside the lake. And we're having to run from location to location, rain coming down, so we've got the camera wrapped. We have to make sure that Rathika is able to jump in quickly and protect stuff if it needs protecting. It isn't like we have a lot of opportunity to make these changes on location like we would perhaps like to, and like we do on some of our other shoots where we do have more time and more crew involved. So that means with the codec that we're using, with the Blackmagic RAW, we're then able to bring back in post what we weren't able to do so much of on the day. And that's what we're going to look at now. And what we're getting a feel for here is just the kind of vibe that we were going for shoot-wise, and a little bit of the color science, but then everything's been graded on this as well. So the one that we're really going to jump into and dissect is actually this sequence just here. In particular, there are two shots that I really want to draw attention to, and I'm just going to pull those out by themselves. So those two clips are the two that I'm really going to delve into because we've done an awful lot to them. If I just take the grade on and off, see obviously we've got the contrast and saturation coming up, but there's a lot more to it than that. Jump on to the next one. Similar story. Here we've got a brief moment of sunshine, although it kept dipping in between clouds, so some of the shots you can actually see within this sequence do go off to a much flatter vibe just there, compared to the more sunlit vibe just there. And we don't have a choice, we can't wait, we have to get the shots and move on, and that's just the way it is on these shoots. But we do get occasional glimpses like this. Everyone was calling this The Hills Are Alive with the Sound of Music. It's just like this amazing landscape with so much different tonality going on in all of the layers that you're seeing in the back just there, and then the trees and the water, and obviously you've got the model in the foreground, and there's some interest in the sky as well. It's not like it's a flat sky. There is a little bit in there which we can draw back. So let's go into the color panel and have a look a little bit at what we're doing just here. I'm going to show you what each thing is doing. But before we get to the nodes, I want to go down here to the left-hand corner and just look at the Blackmagic RAW settings that we bring in with. So to start off with, obviously we are setting it to clip for the decode, and then custom white balance, color space, Blackmagic design, and then I've gone with a custom for this. Just was feeling like I wanted to see how that worked for the workflow, although for all intents and purposes it won't really matter because you're still able to pull all the goodness out of it. Going with a very warm color temperature, 7634 was what I was feeling for this. And part of the reason for that is everything in the back is illuminated with sunlight. So yeah, you might say 5600 hitting that. But then for most of this sequence, the model isn't being hit by much direct sunlight. Because of that, she's just getting cloud ambience and bounce off water and grass. So even though it feels like it should be too warm down here, 7600 odd, it actually, if we look at her, feels about right. You know, it's nice for skin. It feels like everything's got texture and color. It's not overly orange. So don't be afraid when you're looking at things in post like this to pull that color temperature to where you might be surprised actually how high it gets. If we had our Sekonic color meter with us, we could have taken a reading on this, but obviously you can just look at your scopes, you can do it in post, and you can get a pretty good feed on what everything's meant to be. And because she's got this coat on, we have to take into account that yes, skin tone is important, but we're trying to represent a product, and the product has to look somewhat, this is a lifestyle video, but it has to look somewhat like it would do in real life. Otherwise we're going to run into all kinds of issues with misrepresentation of what we're actually filming. Apart from all the things that I listed, ISO, I tend to stick at the base 800. We've got the exposure just pulled down -1. Little bit of a boost in saturation just there, but everything else, apart from the white levels, boosted a little bit, and the black levels just pulled down a tiny bit. Nothing else is that crazy. Then we get into the adjustments. I've got a whole load just here to go through. I'm going to turn absolutely everything off, and we'll start at the front end just here. So that is a sky adjustment, and I'll bring that one on by itself. And if I full screen, you can see that's just been dialed in to be around this area in the back here. And in fact, if we bring the highlight on, just click on that, and then you can see everything that that's affecting just there. Obviously you've got the highlight on, you can't do the same side by side, but that's fine. Just take that off and full screen it again. So the idea with that is that I'm making sure that we retain the texture that's going on in the sky just here and in the mountains before we get to the next adjustment. So the next one is foreground, and that's just boosting it up. So basically I'm saying that in my ideal world we would have more fill light compared to how bright the back is just here, which is getting direct sunlight and some actual sun hitting clouds and a bit of blue sky through there in the corner. So this would be raised up, and indeed that's what I've done. Bringing on the highlight again, you can see the area that's being affected by that. And I'm making all of this very soft, so if we go down and take a quick look at how we've done this, basically just drawn a couple of shapes here, mainly so that I can dial in how soft it is and how different areas are affected, whilst trying to keep the model out of it. And I didn't fancy drawing custom shape with this because it just meant that I could do these two areas slightly separately. So there's a little bit of crossover, but not too much. For the primaries just here, there's a couple of little adjustments going on, nothing major. And then the rest is in curves, I'm just boosting up. Same with the sky adjustment, if we just look at that, I'm just pulling the curves down in the middle. And apart from that, I usually just go over to the key just here and bring the gain on the key out down a little bit. It's kind of a to taste thing. Rather than go in and keep fiddling with all the curves, I will get everything set up, and then I can just go through each of the nodes and just dial the key to where it actually feels like the whole thing starts to gel and sit together. Got a little bit of this going on, and that's just mostly to try and avoid the green a little bit so that it starts to fall off when it hits the trees somewhat. It's not perfect, but it does mean that we get a slightly more realistic edging around there. Next, we're on to the face. So for this, go to here. Now obviously, in the shot, she's tiny. So we're zooming right in there. So we see a little bit of pixelation going on. It's to be expected. We're zooming in 649%. Go into the curves. I pulled that down a little bit just there. And I've also then gone over to the tracker, tracked everything on so that as she moves, that sticks to her face and doesn't go wobbling off into the trees. Tracker works so well in DaVinci, we're using it on basically every shoot. And it's, for all intents and purposes, just real-time tracking. Doesn't delay your workflow at all unless you start doing absolutely tons of it, which is a possibility because it's addictive. Next up, we go over to the sharpening panel, and I just wanted to give a little bit more definition to a face. Ironically, I'm not using the sharpen, which would seem like the obvious choice. I'm using blur. So we use the blur and we just pull it down this way, and it actually has the effect, bring that back in, has the effect of sharpening everything, but it does it in a subtly different way. I won't get into the mechanics of why it's different now, but it can be a more organic way of adding a little bit of definition and sharpness rather than going straight for the sharpening tool. And it's something maybe just experiment with, have a play, see how it feels when you're doing it on your shots, and then you'll get a little bit more of a sense of how it works. And again, over to the key output just here, and I've dialed that right down. Like I say, I go through everything and I just balance it off with that. I'm using a control surface, so I can just go clip, clip, and then dance through the nodes and just dial the key output down really quickly and make sure that everything sits. Next, we've got a little bit more lightening of the trees just over here, and you can see in the key output where that's actually coming in just there. Just drawn a big circle, feathered it right off, so it's minutely catching her, but it really is all about the trees just there. It's going to be our little secret. Next, we have a slight pass to raise everything across this band where the water is. And again, that's just with the curves tool, nothing particularly special. I'm using this again, try and take the trees out a little bit and make sure the sky area doesn't get too much of it. And that's blurred right off as well. Key output, just pulling it back down. And if you look at how that's working, it is just really focusing in on the water, mostly catching a couple of these bits, but that's okay. They can be hot because they're about the hottest part of the image already. The water just needed to kick a bit more for me. So that is next. The vignette. Really obvious. Rather than actually add a vignette tool, I usually just do it with a power window, circle, feather it down, and then just pull the curves down a little bit. This tool just here inverts the selection, and that's important because obviously if you put the power window on, you'd be affecting things in the window. We want to affect things outside of the window, and if we put on the highlight, you can see what that means. So yeah, you can use that to do a vignette. Also, just next to it, there's this little punch through tool. So if you're using multiple windows, you can actually, in fact, let's add another window. So I've got this one here. Let's get the power window up. So that's now adding in other bits to that correction. But suppose that I wanted to cut the model out just here and have it completely off her. Well, I can do that by dialing in a punch through. And by doing that, you could then track that on and remove something. So if you wanted to do a slightly more complicated workflow, using lots of power windows and lots of little corrections to make sure that you weren't affecting the things that you didn't want to affect, then that's also a possibility. Let's take that off for now. So that's the vignette going on just there. Finally, we get to film convert. This is where things are going to change dramatically. Bringing that on, everything boosts up in contrast, saturation, there's more going on now. I've got the Fujifilm stock just there, and then I have adjusted a couple of little things. I've got 75 on the grain just there, and a couple of the other settings I've tweaked somewhat. And a couple of the other settings I've tweaked a little bit. After that, I have a second set of corrections for the face of our model just here. So that's just raising up a little bit, again with a power window, tracked on, and that's just adjusting this time, and then feathering off that way. Just raising up the level, tracking it on, and then it'll stick like glue with that tracking. So cool. The final adjustment that we have just over here is an overall curves. And that's just tying everything together, tightening up some of the shadows, and giving a little bit more pop to the highlights, so it brings a bit more contrast back into the image. Now what I want to do at this point is just take everything off so you can see how it would look to start with. And we'll go full screen. So it's a dramatic difference, but to get the full effect, we need to actually take all of the effects off and just put film convert on. So what we're going to do is grab a still of this, just here. Going to bring that still on. Going to bring all of the effects back in, and then we can actually wipe between the two of these, and that should give you a much better idea of how and why all of these adjustments make such a difference. So without all of those adjustments, the sky is the dominant part of the image. We're not really focusing on the model too much. She kind of blends into the trees. She's just a pair of hands and a face, pretty much. All of the trees on the left look very drab. Trees on the right are getting hit by full sunlight. And what we've managed to do is pull everything down. It does have a slightly HDR vibe, but I feel like it's not too overblown in this situation. Looking at the mountains, eye is drawn to her. We've got a nice line coming down. We've got the water coming in there. Doing the adjustment on this area just here was important. So most of the heavy lifting for this is done with the foreground adjustment. And indeed, if we cut across her just here, take the foreground on and off, and then do it from the other side, foreground on and off. That's what really brings the image to life. Trees adjustment, yeah, it's nice, then we can see a bit more color and texture in the trees. Mountains in the background, I like that because it actually makes more of a feature of this line coming through, and also does a little bit for our water, which gives us a hot spot in the center of the image now, and really focuses our eye into where the model is, and she's going to be cutting across that, so it's going to help to push her to the forefront. Vignette, and then the second face adjustment. So having that face adjustment really does help, and it gives her variation, so she does have bright patches. We've got a bit of saturation in the lips. This side's still down. We've got a nice bit of definition here, so it actually does have an overall look and style to it, which is kind of cool. Let's jump on to the next image. Just here we've got the same kind of adjustment for the mountains, a bit of subtle lift in the middle there, and that's power window. You can see what that's doing. Very, very feathered off. Bit of face adjustment, just to the contrast and the lighting on her face, so we're just raising up the level just there. Again, coming in with the blur, just bringing that down, give a bit more definition. If I take that off, in fact, you can see as I pull it down, everything just tightens up a little bit. It's not sharpening, it just focuses everything a little bit more. It's nice and subtle. Trees on the left, let's bring them up so that there's not just a big black blob on the left hand side. So then moving over, we have an adjustment to the center of the frame just to make it less distracting. Vignette, focus everything in onto Jonah just here, and then film convert, doing all the heavy lifting at the end. So taking everything off, obviously it's log, it's flat, it's not going to look great, but if we just have film convert on and we grab that frame and then we bring everything on and we do our little comparison wipe across. The point is, it doesn't look terrible like that, but like this, everything's just more refined. The focus is very much on her, and we're taking all of the best parts of the image and just making them better. And we would do this in real life if we had time and if we had the crew there to do it. And that is how we do it. Blackmagic RAW in DaVinci, absolute lifesaver. And on this kind of shoot, you can pull so much out of your images. I'm just going to go full screen and play you out with a couple of the clips just here so you can get a bit of a sense of how it all looks. Because this workflow's proved so successful for me when I've been doing my edits and my grades, we're taking the whole team over to DaVinci now and trying to do all of our high-end shoots using Blackmagic RAW, because there really isn't too much of a penalty now for using that. We're not really killing ourselves with data like we would have been if we were shooting cinema DNG, which we have done on projects. But with the cinema DNG at the highest rates, we're churning through cards at a frightening rate, and you just could not do it on this kind of shoot. If you do have any questions, drop them down below. I'm happy to answer any technical workflow questions as best I can. And do try it yourselves, try some of those power windows, do some of the techniques we were looking at just here. And you might be surprised how much you can actually get out of your footage, especially because you're able to track those windows so fast. You're going to find it's an incredibly powerful tool. So give it a try and let us know how you get on.